A blind ex-policeman stands in a courtroom, his loyal K9 guide dog by his side. The atmosphere is thick with tension as everyone waits for his final words. But when his dog suddenly reacts in an unexpected way, the entire trial takes a shocking turn. This is a story of trust, intuition, and the extraordinary bond between a man and his dog. Stay tuned to witness how a blind man's faith in his companion uncovers the truth. The courtroom buzzed with muted whispers and darting glances as Jack Sullivan entered. His movements were deliberate yet confident. Jack was a retired police officer, once hailed as one of the most skilled detectives in the city. But now, life had dealt him an unimaginable blow. He had lost his sight in an accident during his last case. Despite this, Jack's presence commanded respect, his demeanor resolute. Beside him walked Max, his faithful German shepherd, who had transitioned from a K9 officer to Jack's trusted guide dog. Their partnership had grown even deeper in the years following Jack's retirement. Max wasn't just his eyes, he was his protector, his constant companion, and the one being Jack could always rely on. Jack's life had taken another cruel twist. He was now on trial, accused of a serious crime. The case had divided opinions, with many struggling to reconcile the accusations with the decorated officer's reputation. Today, the trial had reached a pivotal moment. Jack had requested that Max be allowed in court, not just as his guide but because he believed his dog might hold the key to his defense. The judge, a stern yet fair woman, granted the request with a touch of skepticism. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, "this is an unusual allowance. I trust you'll explain the relevance of your request." "Thank you, Your Honor," Jack replied, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Max and I have been through everything together. He's not just a dog, he's my partner, and I trust his instincts more than anything." As Max led Jack to his seat, the dog's keen eyes scanned the room, his nose twitching slightly. The courtroom fell silent as everyone watched. Jack reached down, running his hand along Max's back, a gesture of reassurance for them both. Then it happened. Max, usually calm and composed, tensed. A low growl rumbled in his throat, his gaze locking onto a man seated at the prosecutor's table. The unexpected reaction sent ripples of shock through the room. "Max," Jack murmured, his tone questioning. The dog's behavior wasn't random, it was deliberate. What had Max sensed? The courtroom buzzed with tension as the unexpected growl from Max broke the silence. Jack's fingers instinctively tightened on the leash, sensing his dog's unusual alertness. The judge rapped her gavel lightly, calling for order. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge's tone softened but carried a note of concern. "Can you explain what's happening with your dog?" Jack hesitated. "Your Honor, Max has been trained to detect danger. He's never behaved like this without reason. I trust his instincts." The courtroom exchanged uneasy glances. The prosecutor, Mr. Langston, stood with a smirk. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, addressing the judge, "are we really allowing a dog's growl to sway legal proceedings?" Jack lifted his head, though his unseeing eyes stared straight ahead. "Max has saved my life more times than I can count," he said firmly. "If he's reacting, it's because something's not right." Max's growl softened into a low whine, his body tense, his gaze fixed on a man sitting a few rows behind the prosecution table. The man, dressed in a crisp gray suit, shifted uncomfortably under the dog's intense scrutiny. The judge, intrigued, turned her gaze to the man. "Sir," she addressed him, "is there something you'd like to share?" The man, startled by the attention, stammered, No, Your Honor. I'm just an observer." "An observer who seems to have caught the attention of a highly trained K9. Jack interjected, his voice calm but pointed. The courtroom fell silent again, the air thick with curiosity and unease. Max's history wasn't a mystery to anyone familiar with Jack's career. As part of the police force, Max had been trained to detect narcotics, explosives, and even human emotions like fear and aggression. His instincts had been honed over years of rigorous training and fieldwork. Jack knew that Max's reaction wasn't arbitrary, it was a signal. The prosecutor tried to redirect the focus. "Let's not lose sight of the matter at hand," he said. "Mr. Sullivan is on trial for obstructing justice and tampering with evidence. This is not the time for distractions about what a dog might or might not have sensed." Jack remained silent, his hand steady on Max's harness, but internally, his mind raced. He recalled Max's past alerts, each one leading to a breakthrough or saving lives. Was it possible that Max had detected something about the man in the gray suit? The judge addressed Jack again. "Mr. Sullivan, your request to have Max here was highly unconventional, but I allowed it out of respect for your service. Do you believe his reaction is relevant to your defense?" Yes, Your Honor, Jack said confidently. Max has an extraordinary ability to perceive what others might miss. I don't know what he's sensing, but I believe it's important. Important? The judge considered this. Mr. Langston, she said, turning to the prosecutor, do you object to exploring this matter further? Langston, visibly irritated, waved his hand dismissively. If it'll satisfy the court, let's address the dog's behavior. But I don't see how it relates to the charges against Mr. Sullivan. The judge nodded. Very well, Mr. Sullivan. I'll allow you to explain Max's reaction, but I warn you, this must be directly relevant to the case. Jack nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. He turned his head slightly, speaking to Max in a soft, commanding tone. Max, sit. The dog immediately obeyed, his body still alert but now seated beside Jack. Jack's fingers brushed the fur on Max's neck, grounding himself as he spoke. Max has a history of detecting things no one else notices, Jack began. On more than one occasion, he's alerted me to concealed weapons, hidden drugs, even lies during interrogations. He can sense tension, fear, and guilt. I can't explain how, it's just who he is. The judge leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. And you believe he's sensing something now? Yes, Jack said firmly. And I believe it's coming from that man. He pointed in the general direction of the man in the gray suit. The man's face turned pale as the attention of the entire courtroom shifted to him. Your Honor, Jack continued, I request that this man be identified and questioned. If Max is reacting to him, there's a reason, and that reason might be critical to my defense. The judge hesitated, clearly weighing the unusual request. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for her decision. Bailiff, the judge finally said, please escort the man in the gray suit to the witness stand. The bailiff approached the man, who appeared increasingly nervous as he was led to the stand. Max's eyes never wavered, his body coiled like a spring. State your name for the record, the judge instructed. The man hesitated before speaking. Michael Reyes, he said, his voice barely audible. Mr. Reyes, the judge said, her tone firm, you are now under oath. I advise you to answer truthfully. Do you have any connection to this case or the defendant? Reyes's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the stand. I'm just here to observe, he stammered. Jack's instincts told him otherwise. Max's reaction wasn't coincidental, and Jack was determined to uncover the truth. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. All eyes were on Michael Reyes, who now sat uneasily in the witness stand, his knuckles white as they gripped the edge. Max's piercing gaze remained fixed on him, the low growl from earlier now replaced by an unsettling silence. The judge's voice broke the tension. Mr. Reyes, you've stated that you are here as an observer, but Mr. Sullivan's service dog has shown an unusual reaction toward you. Given Mr. Sullivan's history and Max's training, the court finds it necessary to investigate further. I advise you to be forthcoming in your responses. Michael swallowed hard. I don't know what this is about, he mumbled, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Jack's voice, calm but cutting, broke through. Max doesn't react to just anyone, Mr. Reyes. I'd like to know why you're here today. Are you connected to the prosecutor's office, the police, or something else? Reyes hesitated, his eyes darting toward the prosecutor, Langston, who was now shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Your Honor, Langston interjected, his tone sharp, this is an unwarranted distraction. Mr. Reyes's presence here has no bearing on this case. We're allowing a dog's behavior to dictate legal proceedings, which is absurd. But the judge held up her hand, silencing him. Mr. Langston, you argued earlier that addressing this behavior would satisfy the court's concerns. We are now addressing it. Please refrain from interruptions. Jack leaned forward slightly, his sightless eyes directed at Reyes. You're not just an observer, are you? Reyes's breathing quickened, and his shoulders slumped. I work for a private investigation firm, he admitted quietly, his voice barely audible. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge rapped her gavel again. Order. Mr. Reyes, elaborate. What is your role, and why are you here today? I was hired to dig up information on Mr. Sullivan, Reyes confessed, his voice trembling. By Mr. Langston. Langston shot to his feet. Your Honor, I object. This is irrelevant and an unfounded accusation. The judge's sharp glare cut him off. Sit down, Mr. Langston. Mr. Reyes, continue. Reyes sighed, his side visibly deflating. I was tasked with uncovering anything, that could discredit Mr. Sullivan. My instructions were clear: make sure the prosecution's case was airtight. Jack felt a cold knot form in his stomach. And what did you find, Mr. Reyes? Reyes hesitated, his face pale. Nothing, at least nothing incriminating. That's why I'm here today. I was told to observe, just in case something useful came up during the trial. The judge's face hardened. Mr. Langston, is this true? Did you hire a private investigator to gather extraneous information on Mr. Sullivan? Langston's face flushed. Your Honor, it is common practice to ensure a thorough case. There's nothing unethical about hiring investigators. Except when it's done with the intent to manipulate the outcome of a trial, the judge interjected, her voice icy. This court does not condone such behavior, Mr. Langston. Consider this a warning. Jack's mind raced. Reyes's admission was significant, but it didn't explain Max's reaction. He addressed Reyes again. Why did Max single you out? Is there something you're not telling us? Reyes hesitated, sweat forming on his brow. I don't know. I swear. Max shifted beside Jack, his ears pricking forward as if listening intently. Jack's grip tightened on the leash. Max isn't convinced, and neither am I. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Reyes, the court demands full transparency. If you withhold any relevant information, you could face charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. Reyes's shoulders slumped further. There's one thing, he said reluctantly. During my investigation, I was approached by someone, a man. He offered me money to fabricate evidence against Mr. Sullivan. I turned him down, but he was insistent, aggressive. The judge's expression darkened. Who was this man? Reyes shook his head. I don't know his real name. He went by Dixon. He claimed to have connections that could make or break cases. The revelation sent another ripple through the courtroom. Jack's jaw tightened. Dixon, he murmured, his mind flashing back to a name whispered during a past case involving police corruption. The judge addressed the court. Officers, find this Dixon. Mr. Reyes, you are to remain in custody until further notice. This court needs to ensure your safety and verify your claims. Reyes nodded meekly, relief and fear evident on his face as the bailiff escorted him from the stand. Max finally relaxed, his body language softening. Jack knelt beside him, running his hand through Max's fur. Good boy, he whispered. But as the courtroom settled, Jack knew this was only the beginning. The mention of Dixon had cracked open a door that led to dangerous territory. The implications were clear. Someone wanted Jack silenced, and they were willing to go to great lengths to do it. The courtroom buzzed with a mixture of unease and anticipation as Reyes was escorted out. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing the tension to simmer while she reviewed the implications of the testimony. Jack sat quietly, his hand resting on Max's back, but his mind was far from still. Dixon, the name echoed in his thoughts like a siren. Jack had come across that name years ago, whispered in dark corners of precincts during his time on the force. It was tied to a shadowy figure who operated within the gray zones of law enforcement, manipulating evidence, witnesses, and even entire cases. Dixon was a ghost, known but never caught. As the court reconvened, Jack adjusted his posture, his sightless eyes turned toward the sound of the gavel. The judge's voice carried authority. This court will not tolerate interference with the judicial process. The integrity of this trial has been called into question, and we will get to the bottom of it. The prosecutor, Langston, looked visibly shaken but composed himself enough to address the court. Your Honor, while I disagree with Mr. Reyes's actions, there is no evidence tying me directly to this Dixon individual. I've never met or communicated with him. Jack's attorney, Sandra Mills, stood up. Your Honor, while Mr. Langston denies involvement with Dixon, we must consider the possibility of a larger conspiracy at play. My client's history with uncovering corruption makes him a target. The judge nodded. Ms. Mills, does your client have any insight into who this Dixon might be? Jack leaned into the microphone, his voice steady but carrying a hint of frustration. Your Honor, Dixon is no ordinary man. He's a fixer. If he's involved, it's because someone powerful wanted this case compromised. The judge frowned. Do you have any evidence to support this claim, Mr. Sullivan? Jack hesitated. No concrete evidence. But Max's reaction to Reyes wasn't random. Max and I have been through enough to trust his instincts, especially when it comes to danger. The judge acknowledged his statement with a measured nod. Understood. This court takes these matters seriously. We will proceed cautiously. Suddenly, the courtroom doors opened, and a court officer entered, approaching the bench with urgency. He handed the judge a piece of paper. Her expression darkened as she read it. It appears we may have a lead on this Dixon. Officers tracked Reyes's last known communications, and one number matches an ongoing investigation into organized corruption. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge addressed the court. This case has now expanded beyond its original scope. We must ensure the safety of all involved. I am placing this court under temporary adjournment while law enforcement investigates further. Mr. Sullivan, you are advised to remain under protective watch. Jack frowned. Protective watch? What about Max and me? We've been through worse without guards. The judge's tone softened. This is not a request, Mr. Sullivan. It's a precaution. As the gavel struck, signaling the adjournment, Jack felt a mix of frustration and unease. Being confined to protection wasn't his style. He preferred to face threats head-on. But he also knew this was no ordinary case. Jack sat in his modest apartment, the quiet hum of the city providing a faint backdrop. Max lay at his feet, his ears occasionally twitching, as if sensing something amiss. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that events were spiraling out of control. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Max immediately sprang to attention, growling low. Jack moved cautiously, his hand instinctively resting on the collar where Max's ID and tracker were secured. "Who is it?" Jack called. "Detective Ruiz," came the reply. Jack relaxed slightly. Ruiz was one of the few officers he trusted. Opening the door, he greeted the detective, who stepped in, her face lined with concern. "We've got a problem, Jack," she said, lowering her voice. "That lead on Dixon, it's bigger than we thought. He's tied to multiple cases of judicial tampering, and Reyes's testimony puts a target on your back. You're not safe here." Jack sighed. "When am I ever safe, Ruiz?" She gave a faint smile but quickly grew serious. "This isn't a joke. We intercepted a message that suggests Dixon is already moving to cover his tracks." Max growled softly, as if in agreement. Jack knelt beside him, stroking his head. "I'm not running," Jack interrupted, his voice firm. "If Dixon wants to silence me, he'll have to face me." Ruiz frowned. "Jack, you're blind. Can't." "What?" Jack interrupted, his voice firm. "Survive? I've survived war, betrayal, and corruption. Max and I don't need sight to fight. We need information." Ruiz hesitated, then handed him a file. You didn't get this from me, but it might help. Names, locations, everything we've got on Dixon's network." Jack took the file, his fingers running over the Braille translations she'd thoughtfully included. "Thanks, Ruiz. This means a lot." She nodded. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Jack smirked. "Careful's not my style." As she left, Jack sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what lay ahead. Max nudged his hand, a silent reassurance that he wasn't alone. Together, they'd faced impossible odds before. This time would be no different. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the glow of a desk lamp. Jack sat at his small kitchen table, the file Detective Ruiz had handed him spread out before him. His fingers moved deftly over the Braille pages, absorbing every detail about Dixon's network. The more he read, the more the pieces began to fall into place. Max lay at his feet, his head resting on Jack's boots, but his ears twitching at every faint sound from the hallway outside. Jack could feel the tension radiating from his partner. Max was a mirror of his own emotions, on edge, ready for anything. Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "They think they can scare us, Max," he muttered, his voice low. Max raised his head, his sharp eyes meeting Jack's sightless ones. "But they don't know who they're dealing with." The file revealed Dixon's connections to several high-profile cases of corruption, implicating not only private investigators like Reyes but also law enforcement officers, legal professionals, and even politicians. Jack's gut twisted as he realized how deep this web of influence stretched. It wasn't just about him. This was a system designed to protect criminals and silence anyone who got in the way. Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. He froze, his hand instinctively moving to Max's collar. "Max," he whispered, his tone signaling caution. Max immediately rose, his body tense as he positioned himself between Jack and the door. "Who is it?" Jack called, his voice steady. "It's Ruiz," came the reply, but something in the tone made Jack pause. It wasn't quite right, too rushed, too anxious. Jack didn't move. "Ruiz, what's the code word?" There was silence on the other side of the door, then a muffled curse. Jack's heart pounded as he grabbed Max's leash. "Time to move," he murmured, heading toward the fire escape in the back of the apartment. Max followed closely, his steps silent but purposeful. As they reached the window, Jack heard the sound of a lock being picked. Whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't wasting time. Jack slid the window open, the cold night air biting against his skin. Max jumped through first, landing on the metal grate with practiced ease. Jack followed, his movements quick and precise despite his lack of sight. Just as he closed the window behind him, the door burst open. Jack could hear heavy footsteps entering the apartment, the sound of drawers being yanked open and furniture being overturned. Whoever they were looking for something, or someone. Jack and Max moved down the fire escape, their footsteps quiet against the metal. As they reached the alley below, Jack paused, listening intently. The city sounds surrounded him, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the faint chatter of pedestrians. But closer, he could hear the muffled voices of the intruders, now arguing among themselves. "They're not here," one of them growled. Spread out, they couldn't have gotten far. Jack clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He had to get to Ruiz or someone else he could trust, but staying in one place was too dangerous. He gave Max a signal, and the dog led him toward a side street, away from the main road where the intruders might have parked. As they moved through the shadows, Jack's thoughts turned to Ruiz. Had she been compromised, or worse, was she being held by Dixon's people? The idea made his blood run cold. Ruiz was one of the few allies he had left, and he couldn't afford to lose her. Max suddenly stopped, his body rigid. Jack crouched beside him, his hand on the dog's shoulder. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Max's low growl was answer enough. Jack strained his ears and caught the faint sound of approaching footsteps. The intruders had split up, and one of them was heading in their direction. Jack felt the cold steel of his service weapon tucked into the holster beneath his jacket. He hadn't used it in years, not since the incident that had taken his sight, but he was prepared to defend himself and Max if it came to that. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. "I hear him," the intruder muttered, likely talking into a radio. "He's blind. How far could he have gotten?" Jack smirked, a bitter sense of satisfaction washing over him. People always underestimated him because of his blindness. It was an advantage he'd learned to exploit. As the intruder moved on, Jack and Max slipped further into the alley, keeping to the shadows. They needed a plan, a way to turn the tables on Dixon and his network before things spiraled further out of control. Hours later, Jack and Max found refuge in an old safe house Jack had used during his time as an undercover officer. It was small and nondescript, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city. Jack locked the door behind them and leaned against it, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Max sat beside him, his tail wagging faintly. Jack knelt down, resting his forehead against Max's. "Good boy," he murmured. "We'll figure this out together." As dawn broke, Jack sat at the small desk in the safe house, the file on Dixon spread out before him. He knew this fight was far from over, but with Max by his side and the truth starting to surface, he felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about exposing the corruption that had taken root in the system he'd once sworn to uphold. The early morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of the safe house, casting faint patterns on the worn wooden floor. Jack sat at the small desk, his fingers running over the braille file Detective Ruiz had handed him. Max lay curled up near the door, his ears perked and his body poised, ready to react at the slightest sound. Jack's mind buzzed with the weight of what he'd uncovered so far. Dixon's criminal network wasn't just about intimidation and bribery, it extended into human trafficking, weapon smuggling, and a string of unsolved homicides that had been dismissed as gang-related. The scope was staggering, and the deeper Jack delved, the clearer it became that this wasn't the work of just one man. Dixon was part of something much larger. A sharp knock at the door startled Jack. Max sprang to his feet, positioning himself protectively between Jack and the entrance. Jack reached for his weapon, his senses heightened. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but firm. "It's Ruiz," came the reply, her voice low and urgent. Jack hesitated, the memory of the earlier break-in fresh in his mind. "What's the code word?" "Vela," she said without hesitation. Jack relaxed slightly, signaling Max to stand down. He unlocked the door and opened it cautiously. Ruiz stepped inside, her face pale and drawn under the glow of a single dockside lamp. She closed the door quickly behind her, scanning the room as though expecting someone to follow. "What happened?" Jack asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Ruiz exhaled shakily. "They know I gave you the file," she said, pulling a chair to the desk. "I barely made it out of the precinct. Dixon's people have ears everywhere." Jack clenched his jaw, the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "So what now? Do you have a plan, or are we just running in circles?" Ruiz hesitated before reaching into her bag and pulling out a second file. "This isn't just about Dixon anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The higher-ups, the ones funding him, they're tied to an offshore account. It's a slush fund used for bribery, extortion, and worse." Jack's fingers traced the braille on the cover of the new file. "And how do we expose them without getting ourselves killed?" "That's where we'll need help," Ruiz admitted. "I've reached out to someone who's been tracking this network for years, an investigative journalist named Lisa Marks. She's taking a huge risk by meeting us, but she believes in taking these people down as much as we do." Later that evening, Jack and Ruiz met Lisa Marks in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The journalist was younger than Jack had expected, her sharp features framed by short dark hair. She carried a leather satchel filled with notes, USB drives, and photographs. Lisa wasted no time diving into the details. "Dixon is small time compared to the people pulling the strings," she said, spreading a series of photographs on the table. "These are some of the key players, business executives, politicians, even a federal judge. They've built a system designed to protect themselves at all costs." Jack ran his fingers over the photographs, his expression grim. "And you're sure we can link them to Dixon?" Lisa nodded. "I've been working on this for years. I have documents, recordings, and whistleblower testimonies, but I've been waiting for the right moment to release it all. If we expose Dixon first, it'll create a domino effect. His arrest could force the higher-ups to scramble, and that's when we strike." Jack's mind raced as he absorbed the information. This was bigger than he had anticipated, and the risks were monumental. "What's our next move?" Lisa exchanged a glance with Ruiz. "We need to get Dixon's confession. If he implicates the people above him, we'll have enough to take this to the FBI." Jack, Ruiz, and Lisa spent the next several hours devising a plan. The goal was simple in theory but dangerous in execution: lure Dixon into a situation where he'd feel cornered enough to talk. Ruiz suggested using an old informant from her precinct, a man named Carlos, who had a history with Dixon and might be willing to help in exchange for immunity. The team agreed to stage the meeting at an isolated location, with Jack and Max providing backup while Ruiz and Carlos confronted Dixon. Lisa would stay nearby, ready to document the interaction and ensure they had solid evidence. As the plan took shape, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a dangerous game. Dixon wasn't just a criminal, he was a desperate man backed into a corner. People like that didn't go down without a fight. With the plan in place, Jack and Ruiz parted ways with Lisa, agreeing to regroup the following evening. As Jack and Max walked back to the safe house, Jack's thoughts turned to the risks ahead. He knew the stakes were high, not just for him but for everyone involved. Max nudged Jack's leg, sensing his unease. Jack reached down to ruffle the dog's fur, a small gesture of comfort. "We'll get through this, boy," he murmured. "We always do." As they approached the safe house, Jack's phone buzzed. It was a text from Ruiz, * change of plans. "Meet me at the docks at midnight. Trust no one. *. Jack's heart sank as he read the message. The game was changing faster than he had anticipated, and he had no choice but to keep up. The docks at midnight were a place of shadows and whispers. The faint scent of salt water mingled with the metallic tang of rusted cargo containers. Jack stood at the edge of the pier, his posture rigid. Max sat by his side, his ears twitching at every creak and groan of the old wooden boards beneath their feet. Jack's mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why the sudden change of plans? What had Ruiz discovered that warranted such urgency? And could he trust her completely? The stakes had climbed too high for mistakes or misplaced trust. A pair of headlights sliced through the darkness, the hum of an engine growing louder as a black sedan approached. Jack tensed, his hand resting lightly on Max's harness. When the car stopped, Detective Ruiz stepped out, her face drawn and pale under the glow of a single dockside lamp. "Jack," she called softly, glancing around the deserted docks. "Over here." Jack approached cautiously, Max moving in perfect sync with him. "What's going on, Ruiz? This better not be a trap." Ruiz shook her head, her expression grave. "It's worse than we thought. Dixon's men are onto us. They've put a price on your head, and mine." Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. "How did they find out?" "I don't know," Ruiz admitted. "But the journalist, Lisa, she's in danger too. They tried to ambush her an hour ago. She barely escaped and is now in hiding. Jack clenched his fists, his frustration mounting. So what's the play? Do we run, or do we fight back? Ruiz hesitated, then opened the trunk of her car. Inside was a duffel bag filled with weapons and burner phones. If we don't act now, Dixon's going to slip through our fingers. He's planning to leave the country tomorrow morning. Jack's brow furrowed. What's your plan? We force his hand, Ruiz said. We know where he's meeting his associates tonight, a warehouse on the south side. If we can corner him there and get him to talk, we can expose the entire network. But it's risky, and we'll be outnumbered. Jack's mind raced. The idea of storming a warehouse filled with armed men was a gamble, but letting Dixon escape was unthinkable. His resolve hardened as he looked down at Max, who was watching Ruiz intently. You're asking me to walk into a death trap, Jack said finally. But if it means stopping Dixon, I'm in. Max and I will cover you. As they prepared for the operation, Jack felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Ruiz handed him a small A-piece and a pistol, her expression a mix of determination and guilt. I know I'm asking a lot, she said quietly. But we don't have anyone else to trust. Jack nodded, his voice low. This isn't about you or me, Ruiz. It's about justice. It's about making sure no one else suffers because of people like Dixon. For a moment, the two shared a solemn understanding. They were both risking everything, careers, lives, reputations, for a cause that might not even succeed. As they drove toward the warehouse, Ruiz briefed Jack on the layout and their plan. Max will be crucial, she said. His training could give us the edge we need. Jack reached down to scratch Max behind the ears. He's more than just a dog, he said softly. He's my partner, my eyes when I can't see, and he's never let me down. Ruiz smiled faintly. Good, because tonight we'll need all the help we can get. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls reflecting the faint glow of distant city lights. Jack and Ruiz parked their car a safe distance away and approached on foot, Max leading the way with his nose low to the ground. They paused at the edge of a shipping container yard, the warehouse's entrance in sight. Dixon's SUVs were parked outside, confirming his presence. We need to get him alone, Jack said, his jaw tightening. Let's make it count, Ruiz replied, moving stealthily toward the warehouse. She signaled for Jack and Max to follow. The air was thick with tension as they positioned themselves outside a side entrance. Inside, the murmur of voices and the occasional clang of metal echoed through the cavernous space. Jack listened intently, his other senses sharpening in the absence of sight. He could hear Dixon's distinct voice barking orders at his men. The man was confident, too confident for someone about to be cornered. Ruiz gave Jack a nod, her hand on the door handle. Ready? She mouthed. Jack gripped Max's harness, his heart pounding. Let's do this. The door creaked open just enough for Jack, Max, and Ruiz to slip inside. The warehouse interior was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls from the swinging overhead lights. The air smelled of oil, rust, and cigarette smoke, punctuated by the faint buzz of fluorescent fixtures. The tension was palpable. Dixon's voice cut through the murmur of his men. This shipment needs to disappear by dawn. No mistakes, or you'll regret it. His tone was cold, commanding, a stark reminder of the power he wielded. Jack crouched low, relying on Max's subtle movements to guide him. The dog's training shone through, every step was silent, every pause deliberate. Ruiz followed close behind, her eyes scanning for threats. They edged closer to the source of the voices. Jack could make out at least 4 distinct figures, their silhouettes visible through the slats of a stack of crates. Dixon stood near a table covered in documents, his bodyguards flanking him. Ruiz leaned toward Jack, her whisper barely audible. We need him to incriminate himself. If we just storm in, it'll be his word against ours. Jack nodded. Then let's give him enough rope to hang himself. Ruiz gestured toward a row of stacked barrels to their left. If we can get closer to that corner, I can record his conversation. You stay here with Max, be ready if things go south. Jack hesitated. He hated the idea of Ruiz putting herself in danger, but he understood the necessity. Be careful, he said, his voice low but firm. Ruiz gave a tight nod and slipped into the shadows, her movements as fluid as a predator stalking its prey. Jack stayed behind, his hand resting on Max's harness. The dog remained alert, his ears swiveling to catch every sound. As Ruiz moved into position, Dixon's tone shifted. We've got a leak, he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. One of you idiots let something slip, and now I've got cops sniffing around. Jack stiffened, his grip on Max tightening. Ruiz paused, pressing herself against the side of a crate. Her phone was in her hand, the screen dimmed as she recorded every word. "If I find out who's responsible," Dixon continued, "they'll wish they'd never been born. Until then, we stick to the plan. The shipment leaves tonight, no matter what." One of the bodyguards spoke up. "What about that journalist? She's still a problem." Dixon laughed coldly. "Not for long. I've got someone taking care of her as we speak." Ruiz's eyes widened at the revelation. She glanced back at Jack, her expression urgent. Jack couldn't see her, but he could sense the shift in her energy. Something had changed. Max let out a low growl, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Jack tense. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Before Ruiz could relay what she'd heard, the situation took a sudden turn. One of Dixon's men, a wiry figure with sharp features, started moving toward the area where Ruiz was hiding. "Hey, did you hear that?" the man said, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. Ruiz froze, her body pressed against the crate. She held her breath, willing herself to remain unseen. Jack's pulse quickened. He could sense the impending danger, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. Max shifted slightly, his body taut and ready. The man rounded the corner, his flashlight sweeping over the crates. Ruiz ducked just in time, the beam narrowly missing her. But as she moved, her foot brushed against a loose piece of metal, sending it clattering to the ground. "Who's there?" the man barked, drawing his weapon. Ruiz bolted, making a beeline for Jack and Maximum. The man shouted, alerting the others. Dixon turned, his eyes narrowing as he grabbed a pistol from the